Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. Today, we have the privilege of being joined by a stalwart in our industry, Ray Poynter. Thanks for joining us on the show, Ray.
You're welcome.
So Ray, what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
Probably that we need to make choices. There are some bad choices we can make, and there are some good choices we can make. And I'm going to talk about both of those.
Very cool. So what would you say the number one challenge we're facing insights teams in the coming year, perhaps in light of the choices that you talked about?
So the two challenges, one is from outside and one is from inside. So the big challenge from outside is the economy. As they said in the Clinton election, it's the economy, stupid. That is going to be driving so many things, and inflation, potentially recessions, big currency movements. All of those sort of factors are going to have an impact. Inside our industry, it's going to be about how do we transition to new ways of doing business. There is a lot of change coming through, and people need to make sure that they're on the right side of that change.
Cool. So there's a continuing demand for skilled insights professionals, yet a shortfall in supply. What can organizations do in this environment to hold on to their best people?
So there are some simple things which they should do in terms of respecting their people, being flexible, so you don't lose people and you get a good reputation for hiring people. That's not going to help the industry. That will help companies, because there is a limited supply of talent coming into the research industry and the insights industry. And that is not fundamentally going to change. We're seeing fewer and fewer young people being born, particularly in the markets where we tend to operate with market research. So there are fewer people, there are more jobs out there. So it's unlikely we're going to get an increased pool. So what we need to do is enable our people to be much more productive. We have to use automation, we have to use AI, we have to use all of these tools so that people do less clerical work and more thinking human-centric work in order to be productive.
Nice. So there's undoubtedly been a high impact on inflation. You mentioned the external pressures, particularly on consumer behavior in recent months. What does this mean for insights teams? What role can they play in helping their organizations navigate through this challenging period?
I think they've got a key role. So there are a few people around like me who were running companies 40 years ago when we had inflation the last time round. But for most people running companies, it's new. And for most customers and consumers under their mid-60s, it's a new phenomenon. So there is a big change going to happen. Customers, consumers, buyers of products are going to be changing their behavior. It's not going to be a single change. So we need to be able to guide companies and organizations about how should they be charging for their product? How should they reconfigure their product? Should they have a cheaper option? So it's interesting that Netflix has launched the Netflix with advertising so that people do have a cheaper option through that. But there will also be people, and there are lots and lots of studies now that have come out globally looking at how behavior is changing, and about a quarter of the population in the Western developed economies are not cutting their consumption. They are insulated from a lot of the price shocks that are happening, and they are simply spending more. So companies need to know, when do you keep offering your premium products, your premium services, so you're maximizing your revenue, and when do you have to offer alternatives?
Now, data quality has been a big issue that's come up time and time again in our podcasts over this current year. So I'm interested on your take on how insights teams can make inroads into the waning data quality that has been plaguing our industry.
Yeah, so we've heard a little bit about it this year. I think it's going to be enormous next year in 2023. I think that there are going to be some scandals. There is a massive amount of fraud and substandard data coming into our industry. And for the last few years, the only people who've really worried about it are the panel companies. You know, they're fighting a battle all the time between the people who are trying to get into the surveys to make money. And I think that is really going to blow up in 2023. The end clients and the agencies who've been putting their fingers in their ears and pretending it's not happening are going to have to face up to it. So what would I say to end clients? What would I say to agencies? You've got to actually look at your data. Does it look right? You've got to use proper testing methods around that. And then think about which systems are more insulated. So if we think about CX, it is much more insulated because it's going straight from customer lists to people. It's not going through these indirect routes as much. Online communities, much more so. It's one of the benefits of some of the passive data collection routes because we're not going through these organized structures. So yeah, we're going to see some big things going on, I think. And the most important thing for agencies, the most important thing for brands is you've actually got to look at the data, especially if you're using a black box data collection system.
Now, what are some of the key initiatives that insights teams can undertake to deliver more representative insights? Think of from a diversity, equity, and inclusive perspective.
So this is going to be a medium strength issue for some clients. For sometimes it's going to be a big issue. For others, it's going to be less so. So those of us in the insights industry, we need to be aware of it and sensitive to it. We also need to be aware that what you can do is very different in different countries. So I do quite a lot of work in France. It is illegal to ask ethnicity. So one of the techniques that you might use in the UK, you might use in the USA, would be to make sure that you get a good ethnic balance, that you're not excluding people, is actually illegal in France. So you've always got to look at the local market to see what can be done. And then we need to be sensitive with that information. So there are some new guidelines coming out at the moment from SMR about asking sex and gender. So we need to be sensitive to that. One of the most important provisos in those guidelines is there are countries where it is illegal to be gay. In those countries, do not collect information that identifies somebody as transgender because you're putting them at risk. So we need to balance all of these things around. We want to be as inclusive as we can. We want to expand equity. And I think that means we need to employ a more diverse range of people. We are mostly 25 to 55 graduates. That is a really small slice of society. We need a wider set of people on the agency side and on the brand side, looking at those services to be more inclusive, have more equity, more diversity.
So thinking about the agency buyer relationship, do you see these consolidating in this coming year or expanding? So brands working with more agencies or less?
I think brands will probably have to work with fewer agencies because they're going to be hard pressed. They're going to be working with more DIY platforms. So I think that generally the trend will be to having a smaller roster, a smaller number of agencies you work with, but there will be exceptions. There will be brand new agencies coming in, offering something new, and there are always those companies out there who are early adopters of new ideas. But the trend is going to be more towards consolidation smaller rosters for the brands, trying to work with the minimum number of agencies that they can.
I mean, you're also seeing agencies buying up the vertically as well, aren't you? So tech collection, etc.
I mean, there's been such a lot of consolidation in the industry, and that's been driven by a desire to be able to respond in bigger ways. It's been driven by some financial problems for some agencies because of the pandemic, and a really big inflow of money into the industry. So all of those together have really propelled the number of mergers and acquisitions.
So lastly, and it's loosely related to this, the whole traditional versus new methodology usage. What split do you see brands taking next year, and why?
So the big trend I see is towards simpler research. People want research faster. Most of their questions are technically not that difficult because it's a lot of tactical research. Which bottle shall we use? Which ad should we run? So we're seeing a lot of DIY type technology, res tech technology moving through, and that is going to dominate. So the sexy stuff will be the metaverse, it will be the biometrics, it will be the eye scanners, Microsoft HoloLens. All of these are going to grab attention, but it's not going to be where the bulk of the business is. The bulk of the business is going to be in the core monitoring, the core testing, relatively straightforward things. And we will see things like AI built into those processes as opposed to being standalone and different.
Yeah, there is always that gravitation towards the shiny things, but it's typically the tried and tested which does the bulk of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can think about that in our own sort of eating habits. If we think back to our domestic household, yeah, we suddenly see a new thing come on the scene and say, you know what, I'm going to start eating a lot more. Just around the corner from me, there's deep fried sushi. I might eat that twice a year, but I'm going to be eating my bread and potatoes and my meat and things like that day in, day out. But it's the shiny ones you talk about. So there's always this difference between what you talk about and mostly what you do.
Yes, it's an interesting concept. So if I can recap what we've talked about today. So the overarching themes and trends facing the insights industry over the next year or two. Ray, you shared with us those two challenges that the industry will need to grapple with, the external, the huge economic pressures that we're facing, and then also the internal as well, which means that we do need to change and evolve how we're doing things to address those particular challenges. We talked about what organizations can do to hold on to their best people. We discussed the insights professional's role in helping its organization grapple with high inflation. We talked about the data quality initiatives and also some initiatives improving DE&I as well, and the couple of warnings there that we have, and just being very aware of what markets we're playing in and their I guess stances on those particular issues. Ray, you talked about how market research and insights teams can leverage technology to help them better deliver outcomes for their organizations, and that can be across the vertical, the market research journey. We explored the buyer and agency relationship, and how we do expect to see some consolidation happening in the coming year. And finally, we looked at that split of traditional versus new methodologies in the market research world as well. So I think that covered it, Ray. Any final points you wanted to make?
Just really about the need to keep changing. Organizations either get better or they get worse. Nobody ever stands still. And you might be doing really well in December 2022. If you were doing exactly the same work to exactly the same standard in December 2023, you'd be losing ground. We need to keep changing and moving.
Very wise words indeed. Thank you for joining us on the show today.
Pleasure.
And thanks to everyone for listening in as well. We would really appreciate you leaving a review on your podcast platform. Also appreciate you sending this episode to a colleague or peer who might almost also find it valuable as well. Thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.